Everybody knows that knives in the UK are cursed. In Britain, as it is, I don't know if it was a genie in a bottle that did it, or if it was some kind of voodoo ritual happened. The second anybody gets a hold of a knife in Britain, you get the irresistible urge to stab people. I know that when I'm preparing dinner at home, then I really have to hold myself back, because who knows what could happen. It takes an incredible amount of self-restraint to avoid murdering people with a knife in the UK, according to the way that our leaders see it, at least, because that's how they're treating the new legislation that will be that is being put forward on how to restrict the sale of knives. Now, we've already heard some of this over the past few months since the Axel Ruda-Cabana case and the conviction of him for murdering 3 young girls and assaulting a number of others with a knife. And they've said that they're going to be putting in new security checks for the sale of knives on online retailers, mainly Amazon, places like that, where you're going to have to do 2 ID checks now, just in time for Tony Blair's digital IDs to be coming in force later on this year. Before I get into the rest of it, though, and give you the rest of the news, first, reminder to everybody, who knows when the sale is going to stop? We're still selling merch. We keep being told it might be the last week, but it isn't. It's going on forever. It's like a Sports Direct sale. It will never end. Are we closing down? Maybe. Best Buy, just to be sure. Get yourself an Islander Metal t-shirt, or an Islander Forestry Company t-shirt, or one of Calvin Robinson not throwing a Roman salute. That's a rare shirt. I'm sorry. Calvin, I love you. You can also get a mug. You can get many things on the website. What else might be on there? I don't know. You best look yourself and buy something, or else. Anyway, so the news...
That's a good radio voice, almost, like...
Oh, I used to do radio. I used to
Really?
do radio. I used to do
that.
call centers, and they always thought that I was a recording message. Anyway, so there are new life laws coming in that will make a difference, according to some of the people who've been affected by knife crime. As you can see, this pair of British people who's been affected by knife crime. This is Ronan, let me double check his name, Ronan Kanda, who was murdered back in 2023 due to knife crime. Because of him and a number of other incidents, including the Ruda-Cabana murders, we are going to be getting these new knife laws. And what do they entail, perchance? So they say in this article here that we're getting stricter rules for retailers who are selling knives online, and they are going to be introduced in the spring, and we're going to be getting tougher penalties for those who break them. Retailers across the UK will be required to report any bulk or suspicious knife purchases to police, so restaurants are screwed, and the jail term for selling weapons to under 18s will increase from 6 months to 2 years. A new policing unit backed with £1 million. I think, let me just double check it. Oh, they've updated the article since I was taking some of this information down. So some of the information has shifted. Yeah, we're getting a new policing unit with £1 million of funding to monitor for weapons being sold illegally on social media. They're getting created. So we know that always in the British state that throwing money at the problem and creating new police units always works, right? Mm-hmm. That's worked consistently. It's being introduced as part of the government's crime and policing bill in the spring. The rules are in response to a review by the National Police Chiefs Council into the online sale of knives. The changes we will also see... Is it still in this... Okay, here we go. There we are. We'll get increased prison sentences for selling weapons to under 18, and that will apply to either individuals who have processed the sale or a company CEO. And what do you reckon that's in response to, eh? They're coming for Jeff Bezos, guys. Literally, immediately after the Ruda-Cabana conviction, one of the big things that they wanted to do to take it off of the fact that he was a foreign murderer who had racial motivations for the attacks that he committed. Remember, we had many quotes of him saying things from when he was in secondary school, like Britain needs some kind of genocide like Rwanda had, which is fantastic, and then targeted a load of white children. That was brushed aside so we could pay attention to the much more important factor that he managed to buy a knife on Amazon. Yeah. Therefore, Jeff Bezos was to blame.
I mean, one of the most awful responses to all of that was the media, and it usually is.
We had two responses to it. We had the initial response where they blacked out all of the information. People went on the street and protested and then were arrested for it. Many of whom are still in prison at the moment because they were advised by their lawyers not to try and take it to trial, instead just to take an immediate plea deal. And then we had the immediate media response after the conviction of Ruda Cabana, both of which were very clearly coordinated. When you could go to any newspaper stand in the country, see all of these different newspapers, left wing, right wing, whatever you wanted to call them, had the same front page.
And I tried to put through a freedom of information request about that, and it was interesting, the response. I collaborated with Connor Tomlinson, your colleague, to try and figure out whether this was coordinated. And it's interesting how the Home Office actually pivoted to when you tried to figure out whether it was coordinated. But what I was going to say as well,
if it wasn't coordinated by the government, then it was coordinated by the editors.
Yeah.
Either way, it was clearly coordinated action.
Exactly. But seeing Amazon Killer and this reframe of what was happening was just... It was unbelievably
insightful. The real problem, because the real problem, of course, as with many of the problems in this country, relates directly to government immigration policies. But Western liberal democratic governments in Europe, their only goal seems to be to pack in as many immigrants into every country like sardines. That is their one overriding goal. Oh, and also censor everybody who disagrees with them by introducing draconian laws and digital IDs and other kinds of
online safety
acts and censoring the internet. Those are their two main goals: introduce foreign populations, tyrannize the natives. So, obviously, they have to pivot, because by pivoting to the Amazon thing, they can say, well, this gives us even more reason to censor the internet, censor people's ability to buy, restrict people's ability to buy things that previously was just a normal household object. Let's not forget that back in the day, during the early days of England following the Norman conquest, I think in the mid-12th century, it was actually an act of law that an Englishman had a duty to carry a weapon on him at all times. There was an act of arms. I think maybe Henry II introduced this, that meant that if you were an adult male up to the age of about 40, you had to carry a weapon on you.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So that's what this country used to be, and now we are going further and further into restricting knives. Just normal kitchen knives. Is ridiculous. But what else had you found from the Freedom of Information?
About to the Home Office.
Did they just deny it?
They just denied. It was more of a pivot. The language was very vague. It was very typical of, and as you know, I ping out so many, like every single week.
It's worth doing.
Because even when you get a slither of information, it's extremely telling. And when they do say, "Oh, we hold this information, but we're gonna put an exemption." It's easy to
tell lies by omission as well.
Exactly. Yeah, it's always worth doing. I encourage people to ping out these requests as well as much as you can.
Yeah, so some of the other things that we'll see in this law are that retailers are required to bring in stronger photo identity checks for buyers both at the points of sale and delivery, a new offence of possession with violent intent, which will come with a prison sentence of up to 4 years. This means that even if the weapon is legal, if there is intent to cause violence, it will be a crime. Seems somewhat vague, but I'm assuming that they're going to say if you're trying to go at somebody, or if you've got a knife on you and you look sketchy. Will this include butter knives? Because let's not forget that somebody has been arrested in the past in this country.
For camping equipment.
Yeah, for camping equipment and having a butter knife on him. Yeah, that's just how ridiculous this country is. The land of liberty and freedom, the birthplace of the Magna Carta.
Yeah.
Not allowed to have butter knives on you if you look a bit too sketchy. It will also have a consultation on registration and licensing scheme for online knife sellers. So a whole load of new restrictions coming in for online retailers. Yvette Cooper had something to say about all of this. Did she mention anything to do with the actual reason that people are dying in record numbers in the UK for knife crime? No. It's horrifying how easy it is for young people to get hold of knives online, even though children's lives are being lost and families and communities are left devastated as a result. Do you know what else is illegal for people to buy in Britain?
Pepper spray?
Well, that's obviously just sensible, right? Because you wouldn't want young women to be able to defend themselves. No, guns! Do you know what you still get in London?
guns.
Guns, gun crime.
Because the criminals have the guns.
It turns out if you're a criminal, you won't go through legal means to buy weapons, you'll just buy them illegally. So as with everything that the state does in this country, it is criminalizing the behavior and actions of law-abiding citizens.
It's interesting. My old hometown of Crawley, there was a raid not too long, I think a few years ago, where police raided this guy's house and found an RPG in there. And it was kind of like...
I think they're not for commercial purchase, are they? I've not seen them at Asda.
No, or on Amazon.
No.
So, it's it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah. But Cooper added that not enough has been done to tackle the online market over recent years, which is why we made it an urgent priority. The new measures announced by the government will collectively be known as Ronan's Law, after 16-year-old Ronan Kander, who was murdered close to his Wolverhampton home 3 years ago. Ronan Kander was killed in a case of mistaken identity by a fellow school pupil, Prabjit Vedhasa,
Right.
who was also 16 at the time. There was another child involved in it who was 18. Sorry, I suppose he'd be an adult at that point. Do you reckon he had an Anglo name? Celtic, perhaps?
I'm not going to speculate.
I've forgotten the name specifically, but it wasn't.
Right.
It was a name like Prabjit, something like that.
Right.
So there you go. But he used a 22-inch sword that he ordered online using his mother's ID to pass security checks. It was one of nearly 30 knives and machetes he had bought using the same method over several months. So there you go. I mean, he managed to bypass the security checks that were already in place. So might it be that people will still be able to bypass these security checks if they're just clever enough? Probably. The new recommendations also require social media companies to be more accountable for the thousands of knives that Commander Clayman says are being sold on platforms. They're being quite clever in the way that they don't overtly sell, but they show all the knives and encourage people to move to a different online platform to make the transaction. He says that police will be asking tech companies to remove selling content within 48 hours, which is still plenty of time for people to make their advertisements known. The measures are aimed at stopping sellers like Stefan Petrescu from Southampton. He used Instagram to sell hundreds of knives. Police found receipts which revealed that Petrescu had bulk bought more than $3,000 worth of knives, which he then sold online. I'm noticing a distinct lack of Anglo names in all of these incidents, which suggests that the problem might not be that Englishmen have access to knives. If you ask me. Again, we used to have a duty in this country to basically carry a sword on your hip at all times, and these were much more peaceful times, despite all of the interwarring factions in the monarchy, which were basically just small skirmishes back then compared to the kind of wars that we face today. Certainly compared to the war zone that is parts of London.
I just think it's insane about... Do you say he was selling knives on Instagram?
Let's see if we can find some photos, because they included some down here. Here we go. 2 ninja swords. There was also some pictures they had of him with his face out, but you could see he was very clearly... I mean, Petrescu, he was not an Englishman. He would just go on Instagram, post this kind of thing on his Instagram story, and presumably people would know the website to go to or know his contact details so that they could get hold of these things.
Insane.
So again, a lot of this seems to be foreign criminals coming here and saturating the market, mostly going to be bought by other foreigners in the country so that they can go and commit crimes with them. For this, the law-abiding Englishman must suffer.
One of the most insulting things as well that I've heard is the argument for more the youth centres. And that...
We've got some of that in a moment. Yeah. Okay. The idea that if you just put more activities...
You put ping pong in a room, then suddenly knife crime...
The drill gangs will just evaporate overnight, right? Because, I mean, it's a postcode war, so if we put the ping pong hall between the postcodes, they might join together. This is like... You just reminded me. Did you ever watch the episode of South Park where Jimmy and Timmy try to fix the Bloods versus the Crips rivalry?
I think I do remember.
Yeah, and they just invite them all to a local community centre, and they all eat chicken and play basketball together, and that solves all of the crime, and the Crips and the Bloods make amends with one another. Oh wait, I think by the end of that episode they still end up shooting all of each other. But that's what Idris Elba thinks may work. Idris Elba, who has done a recent documentary called Idris Elba, Our Knife Crime Crisis, which saw him spend 12 months exploring the reality of the UK's stabbing epidemic. Elba claimed that around 25% of stabbings are perpetrated using knives commonly found at home, and areas of innovation could help reduce this. He said that not all kitchen knives need to have a point on them. That sounds crazy to say, but you can still cut your food without the point on your knife, which is an innovative way to look at it. So you're not allowed points on the end of your knives now, according to Idris Elba in his ideal world, because otherwise young children of particular backgrounds may stab each other with it. But if you take the points off, they're not going to figure out how to slash. If anything, it'll just make being murdered by someone with a knife more painful, because they're just going to have to hack you to death instead of stab you.
I'm almost lost for words at all of this. It's just, it just
ridiculous.
Like
we live in an enormous circus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To say lightly.
That's clown world for you.
Indeed.
In the BBC film, because of course it was BBC, Elba said that young people in London gangs are not big and scary. No, that's why they carry knives. I've met these people in these London gangs. They're about this big and weigh as much as my pinky finger. And he added that it is sad. It's sad, so sad, that society turned our back on them. It's society's fault. Where are the youth clubs? If we had the youth clubs, these kids wouldn't be stabbing each other. And it goes on to add that there were more than 50,000 serious knife crime offences recorded in England in the year ending June 2024. London has the highest rate of serious knife crimes. And if you want to wonder, well, okay, maybe if you take the points off of knives, will that work? Some companies have already been doing that. Since 2020, Viners decided that they were going to sell knives with no tips in response to rising knife crimes. This is what modernity in Great Britain, in the UK, bruv, has reduced us to. You can't. Some are just going to stop putting the points on the knives. Again, you can't cut someone to death with that, right? They're going to go for you. They're going to. And it's just going to bounce off you, and nothing will happen, and they'll just go, oh, I guess, never mind then, keep your money.
It makes it even more insulting just hearing about the people going camping and being arrested for cutlery stories. You just hear that, like, you know, people getting arrested in the countryside just for getting away from the cities and still encountering a police search for simply cooking a full English breakfast in the middle of nowhere and still being searched and almost detained for it and arrested. It's just, I don't know. It's one of these subjects, right? It's so tiresome. It's so and it's anger inducing, but it's also just really, really tiresome because the amount of videos, the amount of stories, news articles, everything of so many people, kids mainly, killing each other, especially in London, Birmingham, Manchester, all of these big cities. And I know people such as Adam Brooks, who does really good work on trying to do charity work and, of course, encourage people to put the knives down, quote unquote, and attempts to actually try and, you know, do something about it, where as you just hear all this, society's turned our backs, blah blah. It's like, well,
you get blamed for it.
You get blamed for
you
it.
Get blamed for it. Society gets blamed for it. God forbid we blame the murderers.
Yeah, God forbid.
For what they're doing.
Yeah.
God forbid we actually police hotspot areas where this kind of thing happens, because a lot of it comes down to, in London, for instance, a lot of the drill gangs.
Yes.
In Brixton and other parts of London. I've mentioned this ad nauseum, but it bears repeating. The drill gangs engage in postcode wars with one another. They murder one another, often with knives, and then people throw their hands up and go, well, it's not like we can arrest them all, when we know that they rap about the kinds of crimes that they commit, and there is an interactive map that they post themselves showing the gang territory. Yeah. I found it. It was very easy to find. I just Googled gang territory. It's one of the first things that comes up. So if the police wanted to, they could go, okay, well, this gang's here, this gang's here, this gang's here, this gang's here. We'll just make sure to increase our presence there.
Yeah.
But sociologists and people that the government listens to would cry about it being over-policed.
Right.
And then say that that's the reason for crime, right? Because I know that if police show up in my neighbourhood more often, I'm more likely to commit crime because I just can't resist.
There's two things as well to add. About drill, I read about Amnesty International campaigning against courts who use drill lyrics and drill music as evidence, as confessions or evidence, and Amnesty International is rallying against that, saying it's a free speech issue. And I'm kind of like, if you're inciting, like, surely that's...
It's not even inciting. Sometimes it's not even just
a
confession. Here's
literally
who I killed the other week.
Yeah, or plan to, you know. And I sit there and I go, I just sort of, my head just sort of spins, and I just don't even know if I can articulate how annoyed I just get at seeing that. I had something about the amnesty that I wanted to get out then, but the other thing... it's completely gone. But if it comes back...
That's fair. Of course, in all of this, what I'm talking about, because I have to mention it because it's the obvious factor, is that a lot of these crimes are being committed by and against foreigners in this land. And you try and look up the information in the ONS, but the ONS say that they get their information from the Home Office. The Home Office specifically do not hold police recorded crime figures and overall offences, including a knife, by ethnic groups. So they don't collect that information. But there are other ways of finding this, including the London Assembly back in 2022 did a report on this because they wanted to find ways to stop the knife crime epidemic in London, and as part of that they looked at which groups are committing these crimes and who are they committing them against. Well, they even did in this is a Mayor of London Assembly official article, calls for commission on knife crime in the black community. This is how it starts. This is not 4chan writing this. This is an official report. Despite making up only 13% of London's total population, black Londoners account for 45% of London's knife murder victims, 61% of the knife murder perpetrators, and 53% of knife crime perpetrators. So this sounds a lot like it is for the most part, over half of that is being committed by particular groups against that same group.
Well, this is, did you say Mayor of London? So this is a Sadiq Khan appropriated report.
Done back in 2022.
Yeah.
But for this kind of crime that's being committed by foreign populations, you and I and other law-abiding people in this country have to be punished in ways that probably will not affect these rates because, again, these people are criminals, the ones committing these crimes. Criminals are able to get around checks because they involve themselves in crime, shockingly enough. One of the other things that I found that was interesting was this YouGov poll that was done 2 years ago talking about white and ethnic minority views and experiences of crime. And if I scroll down here, you can see the fear or knowing of people who have been a victim of knife crime. You can see that ethnic minority Britons say that 19% of them know somebody who's personally been the victim of knife crime, whereas white Britons it's 12%, so that's a difference right there. So they're more likely to suffer from this kind of crime. But then if you go down as well and look at the attitudes that they have, what measures do these people think would be effective at tackling knife crime? So for me, the big one would be put them in prison and police the areas where this is going to happen. Yeah. And you would expect that given they're more likely to be affected by these crimes, that they would be in support of that. No, white Britons are far, far more in favour of long sentences for people committing these crimes. They're also far, far more in favour of things like police having stop and search powers. So this seems to come down to me as a preference, which is that, yeah, they know that they're being victimized by these crimes, but they still wouldn't like to have the kind of policies that have been shown to actually work, which is criminalize murder, criminalize put these people in prison. I know it sounds like a daring idea, but if we make murder illegal and then enforce that law, it might actually have an effect. What they say, what they would prefer, is youth centres and educational programmes, of course.
I think as well, it's worth pointing out, Theresa May decommissioned the idea of stop and search as well during her tenure.
Another Tory victory, thank you.
Yeah, and that led to an explosion of knife crime, or like an epidemic of knife crime, which has since spiraled completely out of control. And I mean, if you see statistics like that, post repealing a measure that a lot of people decried as horrific.
Yeah.
And then you look at the statistics after and you see a completely different result.
And again, it's all symbolic purely for the purposes of making sure our elite classes don't feel racist.
Well, it's liberalism. It's liberal tyranny.
Yeah, and there's also, I remember a few months ago in my hometown, they had this horrible knife angel monument, which is part of some nationwide campaign where they have this big angel model that's made up of knives that have been handed in, and they take it around the country and have it in the town centres of these places so that it will encourage criminals to hand in their knives. Ridiculous! If you believe that that's going to work, you live in an absolute fantasy land, or you're an idiot, or both. It's so symbolic.
Never heard of that before.
Purely for the sake of not actually doing anything effective. Interestingly, when you mention when this all went to a spike, I was sent this by one of our back-end guys, Cameron. So thank you very much for that. And you can see here a graph charting the explosion of knife crimes or possession of knife offences in England and Wales from 1995 to 2025. I think this was 2024 probably. This was a very recent report that came out. And you can see after about 2006, 2007, it explodes. So that's about when the Blair wave, you could say,
Brown, wasn't it?
Blair, but also I was talking more about the sort of immigration that came in 97.
97.
Yeah, and then you can also see what that'd be about 2017 around Theresa May as well. It spikes there again as well.
That's what I was thinking.
It's so stark how, again, these policies have a genuine effect on the world, and not actually doing anything about the crimes, not having the information or not being prepared to face the information showing who is committing these crimes and who they're committing them against only makes us all poorer and only means that the government gives themselves more of a pat on the back and more excuse to tyrannize actual law-abiding citizens in this country. That's what I have to say about that. This won't work, basically. This won't work, and people won't stop getting stabbed because the government doesn't want that.
And it's sad, really. And like I told you, I don't even. The topic of that is it's extremely tiring. It's not only tiring, it's distressing, and when you look at that graph and see how it just continues and continues, and then you see drops of where a policy would be introduced, and you start to see results, and then it gets repealed, and then it goes back up. And you start to pull your hair out and you go, well, how is this going to be sorted?
Well, it becomes reactive, and you can say that, most criminal legislation is going to be reactive because you need somebody to have committed a crime. Obviously, we don't want Minority Report. But if we have data showing that crimes are being committed in these areas by particular populations against particular populations, then we can at least have some kind of preventative measures in place if we know that these are going to be criminal hotspots. Again, just as something as simple as going, hold up, these gangs have a map.
Yeah.
These gangs
have an
interactive map that show you where they operate. Why don't we go and arrest some people? It's like the whole MS-13 thing in El Salvador, where you'd have the liberal chattering classes talking about how do you know that he's a rapist and murderer? All because he's got "I'm a rapist and murderer" tattooed on his forehead. Well, yeah, that kind of gives it away a little bit. That gives it away a little bit.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.